Hello, welcome back to a special edition of Inside the Birds. We're going to focus again on analytics, value, data, all that number crunching good stuff that the people love. So, of course, we bring our expert back, Sam Finkel. And Sam, I got to thank you. You did an amazing job putting this together, this presentation, this two-part series we're going to do that focuses on some of the trades the Eagles have made off-season wise over the last 2 years, the value of them, based on the chart and the data, which you'll go through. And then we'll compare who they traded away versus who is expected to replace them and how they measure up analytically. And then later, in the second part, we'll get into what I call bargain shopping free agent spree, or bargain shopping spree that the Eagles have been on in free agency, because they have brought in a ton of names, especially over the last 72 hours, right? And a lot of people probably aren't familiar with a lot of the names. So I imagine this was an interesting exercise for you, because you probably had to go deep into some archives to get information about some of these guys.
No doubt. It was definitely an adventure. I think that's the best way you can describe it.
We were joking before I hit record on this. Not a lot of long snapper analytics data out there, is there?
I was really hoping there would be, but they just don't track it.
Yeah.
So for you fellow long snapper fans, this may not be as exciting for you.
Yep, I think it's Charlie Hewlett news. You may have to find, I don't know, Charlie Hewlett Illustrated to get all the information on the guy. So let's give a quick. I'm going to do this the most efficient way possible. Sam, we're going to go through who they've acquired versus who they lost. And, that's going to be about over 20 names. So I'm going to try to make it clean and efficient for everybody. We know the Eagles have traded for two players in particular: Dorian Thompson-Robinson, quarterback, and Kenyon Green, offensive guard. They have acquired through free agency edge rusher Josh Uche, edge rusher Patrick Johnson, tight ends Harrison Bryant and Kylan Granson, cornerback Adoree Jackson. I'm going to call Avery Williams a return specialist. Apparently he's got some running back and D-back the history in them, but we'll call him return specialist. Charlie Hewitt, the long snapper, and of course they re-signed Ben Van Sumeren, their own linebacker, along with Zach Baun, who got, of all the names we're going to mention, got the big blockbuster contract from the Eagles. On the way out via trade has been Kenny Pickett and CJ Gardner-Johnson. Of course, James Bradbury not coming back. Josh Sweat got a landmark deal with the Arizona Cardinals. Brandon Graham most likely to retire. Mekhi Becton just most recently signed with the Chargers. Avonte Maddox so far is just out in free agency. Milton Williams, maybe the most amazing deal of them all, with the New England Patriots. Isaiah Rodgers, cornerback, signs with the Vikings. Kenny Gainwell and Darius Slay signed with the Steelers. Britton Covey, Rick Lovato out there, Raven Clark, CJ Uzama, Fred Johnson, all free agents, along with Nick Gates. Oren Burks getting a 2-year deal with the Bengals, and Paris Campbell and Jack Driscoll still out there, along with Ian Book. So that is a partridge in a pear tree of all the free agent acquisitions and losses. So of all those things, I just want to go back quickly to our last series, which was previewing free agency and trying to use your predictive modeling to figure out contracts. Any one of them that sort of blew you away?
Yeah, I was right on every single one of them except for two, and definitely was kind of off on those. And that was Milton Williams and it was Zach Baun. Both of those I underprojected, but everyone else I was within a margin of. So those two really blew me away,
right?
And blew the model away, really, truly.
Right. And for those who didn't catch it or are just catching up, we were very upfront about how a predictive model that uses data, precedent, numbers cannot function like a general manager who's under a lot of pressure and decides, I'm going to give this guy $28 million a year, whether he's made a Pro Bowl or not, which is what the Patriots essentially did to Milton Williams. And God bless Milton Williams. I think he's great. And he, there's a good chance he lives up to that deal, but you can't, it's tough using historical precedent to have known that we knew Milton Williams was going to get paid. And you even said in your show, he'll probably get paid more than the predictive modeling says, but all of us at 26 million were left sort of like, wow,
It was a very shocking number for sure. But good for him, like you said.
Absolutely. So one interesting thing you noted right away is that the average age of an Eagle being brought in is 27.5 years of age. The average age of the losses, so somewhat weighted by Brandon Graham and Darius Slay, right, is 29 years old. So the Eagles now, and it's not fair because they've had twice as many losses as acquisitions, and they'll probably make more acquisitions. But I am guessing that most of the acquisitions the Eagles will make from now between the start of the season are not going to be over 30. So the Eagles did get younger statistically here by a year and a half on average, right, with their moves.
So yeah, and talk about weighted. It's also weighted with Hewlett, right? Because he's
Great
35,
point.
so it's weighted in both ways. But you're right. You're absolutely right. The trend, it seems, this offseason is getting cheap young players with 1-year deals, at least so far of what we've seen.
The one guy that really jumps out from an age standpoint was that Adoree Jackson, I think, just turned 30 or is going to be 30 when he might still be 29 right now.
Yeah. So those numbers are all at the start of the season, next season. So
right.
He I believe he still is 29, but he will be 30 as when the season begins.
You could have convinced me he was like 42 because I just feel like he's been in the league. I remember when the Eagles were interested in him coming out of USC. So the fact that he's not even yet 30, but will be in the season is fairly interesting because I think he's looked at as an old player. And get it, 30 at corner is long in the tooth, but still, like, overall, it's like, man, I thought he would have been older than 30.
I wouldn't have shocked me either. I've definitely heard that name a long time, especially when you were saying when you hit free agency for the first time.
And on the other end, I mean, Kenyon Green, only 24. So we'll get into to that when we talk about the trade. So let's get into the trades Eagles have made. I like how you kind of headlined it, a tale of true trades. So you remember the Eagles traded to get Kenny Pickett from the Steelers. I believe they traded a 3rd rounder and they got Kenny Pickett and a 4th rounder in return. Now they have sent Kenny Pickett to the Browns to get a 5th rounder and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So I'm setting the stage there. I want you to sort of take it from here on the trades, how they fold in, and what kind of data you've come up with and what it shows you.
Yeah, sure. So there was a lot of moving pieces that many fans may not be aware of that have happened kind of simultaneously and throughout this whole process. And what we did is we looked at the Fitzgerald-Spielberger trade chart, which I'll explain a little bit later once we get to it, and we try to see what that value is. But it's a really cool chart. We'll talk about it in a second. But basically, the first trade, like you said, was the 98th pick in the 2024 draft, a 3rd rounder for Kenny Pickett and a 2024 4th rounder, pick 120. So it was just kind of a move back for the Eagles. So when the Eagles had that 120 pick, they traded it to the Dolphins for a 2025 3rd rounder, number 79. That 2025 3rd rounder, 79, plus 2 7th rounders this year, 236 and 248 were traded to the Commanders for Jahan Dotson and a 5th rounder this year, 165. So basically the whole trade, when you take out all the things that moving pieces, the Eagles gave a 2024 3rd rounder, number 98, and 2 2025 7th rounders, 236 and 248, for a 1-year deal of Kenny Pickett, so a rental, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Jahan Dotson, and 2 5th rounders this year that are back-to-back 164 and 165.
That's really interesting. And it's hard then. I know we're going to come up with a final value, but so how do you separate sort of the value of a trade based on the numbers, what the numbers say, right, versus the player's production?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to do. It's very tough to say like this player is worth X and Y, especially because there's so many more factors than just production, right? Like, can you extend this guy? Can he stay for more than a season? Like there's a lot of intangible and even just tangible stuff that get factored in, and it's hard to get a number for.
Right.
And so what you do is, I mean, the trade kind of works out when you have the success that the Eagles had, right? Winning a Super Bowl seems like it would make any trade really worth it, which is a kind of a dangerous way to think because then you get in some trouble. But I think that's one gauge, right? And that could justify any kind of trade.
Yeah, I'm fine. Like I'm a big business is business. It doesn't, the context shouldn't matter. A third round pick, if we separate individually, a third round pick for Jahan Dotson, who caught what was he? Did he catch 15 passes all year long? I forget what the actual stats are, but a third round pick for Jahan Dotson, I didn't like the move then. And I think the value of that trade is not very good. But if you're an Eagles fan, you say we won the Super Bowl and he caught 2 passes in the Super Bowl and that's good for me. Okay. I'm not going to quabble with you. I think you wouldn't want your GM to have a history of trading third round picks for players who are only going to give you that scant production though.
Absolutely. That's why I said, like, a caveat it a little bit, that it can be a dangerous way of thinking. But I mean, at the end of the day, he was a contributor on the Super Bowl team. And I mean, hopefully his role will just continue to grow as he builds trust with the offensive staff and with Jalen Hurts.
Got it.
So
go ahead with the value according to the chart. So explain the chart if you can a little bit, please.
Yeah, so it's a chart that is on Over the Cap, and what it is it takes every pick and it weights the value of the pick. So it would help you. It's really good at telling you what picks are worth relative to other picks. What it's not good at is telling you what a player is worth. And like I said, that's really hard to do.
Right.
So a lot of this analysis, we're going to have to kind of impute this value for Kenny Pickett's rental and Jahan Dotson and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So with that being said, I'll tell you what the chart actually said. So that number 98 was worth 676 points.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 7th rounders were worth 231 and 206 for a grand total of 1,113 value. And then the 2 5th rounders were worth 416 and 412 respectively.
Mm-hmm.
And so together that value is 828. So if we're just looking at the draft capital, the Eagles lost 285 value, which is the value of the 212th pick, which is in the 6th round. Mm-hmm. So what you have to kind of figure out is, does the Kenny Pickett rental, Jahan Dotson, and DTR, is that worth more than a 6th rounder?
I would think it most certainly is.
Yes.
I mean, I think even the Jahan Dotson knock, if you got like his production out of a 6th round pick, you might be all right with that.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And when you look at it in this context, it looks like the Eagles won the trade. And I think that's a really good way and a better way to kind of ground these trades. So would you trade a 6th rounder for those 2 players and the 1-year rental? And I think the Eagles most certainly would, like you said.
Right. So the reason why this trade chart is so good is because I think it helps people get a value versus value perspective, certainly general managers, when you're trying to figure out what's worth what. The reason why, to your point you were making before, it's somewhat flawed is that this chart is going to treat a hit in the 5th round on a long snapper, right, the same way it's going to treat a hit in the 5th round on a quarterback. They're going to have the same value regardless, or even a miss, I guess. The points are the points. They don't change.
Right.
When you all know that if you get a quarterback in the 5th round and he's a starter and he's good, it doesn't matter how great or bad your long snapper is. That changes the value of the actual pick. That's where you get into the player versus the value of just the slot that you're picking in.
Absolutely. It's in a vacuum. It kind of looks at only the pick and the draft capital. Whether how you spend it is kind of indifferent. So
100%. All right. So now that we understand that, and the fact that they lost in draft capital, but compensate to potentially win because they got the Pickett rental, Dotson, who has another year, and DTR, the fact that they did that shows you that there's sort of multi-layers to the conversation. It's just really interesting to have. And, in general, the Eagles, I think, would do all of this all over again if they knew the outcome. Even if they didn't know the outcome, they would probably do it all over again as well.
I agree.
So let's get into now a statistical comparison of the player who's been traded away versus the player who's been added. And we'll start at quarterback, Sam. So obviously Kenny Pickett goes, Dorian Thompson-Robinson comes in. Now this is a little bit difficult from comparison because I believe the roles will be different. Whereas Pickett's a former 1st rounder. He was brought here to be the primary backup. DTR, a lower draft pick, somewhat of a project, and is going to be the number 3 quarterback, barring something, terrible happening to Tanner McKee. It'll be Tanner McKee number 2 and DTR number 3.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why it's not necessarily the most fair comparison, especially because Pickett also started for a couple years. And I mean, DTR did have some starts last year, but they were, not under the best conditions, and he wasn't the starter at the beginning of the season. But that being said, I mean, the Eagles did like DTR in the 2023 draft. He was a top 30 visit for them. And I know that there was that commentary that he has the same chess mentor as Hurts. So
Yes.
maybe it'll serve some, it'll create some fiery quarterback, culture in that room. So that, for that perspective, that's a cool thing. But
like
that's
that
not.
The Eagles didn't hold it against Dorian that he played for Chip Kelly. That was nice of them.
Yes, that was very kind. I could easily see them, turning the other eye because, yes, that was a time. That's all I'm going to say. That was a time to be an Eagles fan. Well, looking at the statistics, right, there was only one statistical area that I thought DTR really shined in comparison to Pickett, and that was the sack percentage, right? So Kenny Pickett was, on average in his career, sacked 7.2% of his dropbacks. And DTR was sacked on average of 6.1% of his dropbacks.
Right.
So I think
it's safe to say neither of those are great numbers. It's just that DTR is better at it.
That is a very safe thing to say. Yeah, okay. For sure. Basically, it just shows that maybe DTR, and again, there's not a big sample size, so you got to kind of take that with a grain of salt, right? I mean, if you look at their actual games started, Pickett started 25 and DTR started 5. So it's a pretty wide range of outcomes, and it's hard to, actually take meaningful data out of that. And anytime you have a small sample size, you have that issue.
100%.
But we can extrapolate it a little bit and say that maybe DTR is better at, getting the ball out or, not taking a sack.
All right. And we also know he's much more elusive of a runner than Kenny. But not that Kenny Pickett's not, Kenny Pickett is not a statue by any stretch of the imagination. He can get around a little bit, but Dorian Thompson,
they had to make a whole new rule for him, in college football.
So. Right. Anything else is very, very dangerous, I think. Not just because it's comparing a first-round pick and a guy who started versus Dorian Thompson-Robinson, but just because of the small sample size. I mean, I could bemoan the fact that your data says that DTR, his yards per attempt average is 3.83, which is dreadfully low compared to Pickett's 6.31, which itself is not a great number. But I mean, again, it's such a small sample size for DTR, and the environment doesn't get counted as well either.
Sure. And I think that's a really important point that we need to, be transparent on, right? Because just because he found that, lack of success with that team doesn't mean he can't step in if, hopefully he doesn't need to step in. The best case scenario is he's just a locker room guy and, plays preseason or, when we're blowing someone out. But, just because he had lack of success there doesn't mean he can't find it here.
Right. All right. I mean, the big thing here is that DTR is somewhat of a project, and he starts with the Eagles on a blank slate. And, they've got some new offensive coaches. From the quarterback's coach is certainly new, Scott Loeffler. So this will be his first real. Obviously, he has to work with Jalen Hurts, but we'll see what he can also do with the younger quarterbacks, and if Kevin Patullo's offense has anything different that makes it more or less quarterback friendly.
And I wouldn't sleep on this the new analyst that they brought in too, Montgomery Van Groder.
Oh, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've met him. From Georgia. I met him a couple times at the coaching convention. He's a very bright guy, very nice guy. Seemed to really know what he's talking about. I'm actually really excited to see what he can do with the quarterback room.
Nice. What struck you about him when you met him? What kind of things did you guys talk about?
It's weird because it was so many years ago. It was probably, 5-6 years ago, and maybe 5. What really struck me is just how willing he was to help people and talk to me. He gave me a lot of advice, and nice. He's a guy that I just see he knows ball, and I'm excited to see how his career continues to grow. And I was actually really excited when I saw that the Eagles hired him.
Montgomery Van Groder is not the kind of name that really screams football player, right?
No, not really. But he's a big dude.
Executive or heir to some kind of big company. But good. I'm glad you mentioned that because I had forgotten about that. Good stuff. All right, now let's talk about a little bit more of a more apt comparison in that regard. With the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade, the Eagles brought back Kenyon Green. He was a first-round pick, I think 15th overall.
Yep.
2022. Yep. I remember him coming out of college. It's not like this was an overreach by the Texans. He was considered the top guard and a great athlete and a mauler, and it did not work out for him. Obviously, he didn't play in 2023 because of the shoulder surgery, I believe it was. So but it's not like he got off to a great start in his first year either. It just hasn't been good for him there. They just lost Mekhi Becton, who reclaimed his career with the Eagles, and they've also got Tyler Steen, who's about to enter year 3. And I think Sam is fair to say would be the leader as we record this now of the pack to start right guard, because we just haven't yet seen Kenyon Green under Stoutland's tutelage yet. I got to see some things before I can start to say, okay, I can give him a little bit of, like we had to see it from Becton, which we started to see early after OTAs in camp. And then Steen, remember, hurt his ankle. And when Becton got in there, I remember Andrew saying, hey, you can see he's getting it. It's making sense there.
Yeah, 100%. And when I saw the trade immediately, I thought that Steen would still probably, take that role. And, there's a philosophy with this organization that you can't have too many quality offensive linemen.
Right.
And probably defensive linemen too. That's probably just the way that the organizational philosophy, and you really see it here. Whether you think the trade was good or bad, I mean, they're getting another guy that they hope can develop and plug and play if necessary.
There you go.
And listen, he's on a 1-year deal because of his expiring contract. But just because he doesn't start this year, which again, at this point in time, snapshot of time right now, I'm not sure he's going to. They could probably re-sign him for pretty cheap, and he can continue if he buys in, and you can continue to develop. This doesn't need to happen overnight, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. All right. So when you compared Becton to Steen to Green, what jumped out at you from an analytical standpoint?
Yeah. So I used the same stats that I did in my guard model, which Becton, it said he was going to get from like 9 to 12, I think, and he got 10. So I thought those would still be relevant to talk about today. And what we looked at, what I think is the most important ones, is total pressure allowed per game and pressure percentage.
Okay.
So Kenyon Green over his career allows 2.59 pressures per game at a pressure rate of 5.34%. And, just saying that in a vacuum, it's whatever. It doesn't sound like anything special. Here's where it gets really problematic in my eyes. So if you look at Becton's career, right, and he played tackle, which we have talked about in the show is a much harder position because you're isolated. You don't have help on either side. Becton, in his career, and this is tackle for most of the years that he played besides last year, 2.18 pressures per game at a pressure rate of 3.78%.
Oh, God. So you're comparing 5.34 to Kenyon Green to a struggling tackle, Mekhi Becton, at 3.76. I don't want to say it's twice as worse, but you're getting close.
Yeah. And here's the thing. The worst year of Becton was worse than the career and the worst year of Kenyon Green. So I think that is an important thing. And that was his contract year, Mekhi Becton. So that's when he was really struggling. He got that label. I mean, he had that label throughout his entire time in New York. But really, his worst career, he had 3.13 pressures allowed at 5.08% pressure rate.
Right.
So there is hope in that regard, but it is a little disconcerting to say the least.
Right. And as far as Tyler Steen,
sure, he had a total. Again, it's a pretty small sample size. So Steen has only played 470 snaps in his career, when Kenyon Green has played 1,405 snaps in his game. So I think you have to take that into consideration when you're doing this analysis. And I always want to highlight that, no one is going to be a 1-for-1 comparison. But in those 470 snaps, Tyler Steen has allowed 0.56 total pressures per game, which is incredible, at a pressure rate of 3.83%.
So is that pressure rate of 3.83%, what do you make of it, knowing that, we just talked about Green's was 5.71, right? No, I'm sorry, 5.34, which was extraordinarily high, right? Becton as a tackle was 3.76. So as a tackle for his career. So how does the 3.83 to you compare to Becton's 3.76 as a tackle?
Yeah, I mean, it's higher than you'd want it to be, but it's not within like a terrible range, right?
Right. As
It
a guard should have a better pressure percentage than a tackle, though, because you're not dealing with those great speed rushers all the time, right? Isn't that
correct.
theoretically okay?
In theory, absolutely.
Right.
You also you have help a lot more as a
Yes.
guard when you're in the inside.
Good
So
point.
I think that it should be lower. And I would expect Steen, as he continues to go through Stoutland University, you know, that he will continue to improve on those stats. And you'll see it kind of regress to a better place, right? Maybe a high 2%, mid 2%.
Yeah. I think what we'll do after the season, assuming Tyler Steen becomes a starter or starts enough games, we can look back after the 2025 season, Sam, on Tyler Steen at right guard, if he's the guy, how his season compared to Mekhi Becton's 2024 season at right guard, and see if there was improvement, regression, stays the same, whatever you want to call it, as opposed to now when the numbers are just so skewed for everybody.
That'll be a fun exercise. I definitely would love to see that.
All right. That is great stuff. We just did I was really fascinated by the trade value stuff you put together. I really thank you for that. And then comparing the positions, fun now, but might be more fun a year from now when these guys have a little bit more snaps, whether it's the quarterbacks or the offensive tackles. In our next part of the podcast, we are going to get into the shopping spree, the bargain shopping spree, and we're going to tell people what you found out about these players the Eagles have brought in from an analytics standpoint. Look forward to doing that with you. All right, so that's going to do it for this Inside the Birds analytics version, and we'll catch you on the next one.